Welcome to FPTV New Releases. This time around with my very special guest, Andy Davidson. Andy's a Bram Stoker Award-nominated horror author. He's born and raised in Arkansas. He's coming at us live from Georgia. We've already had a conversation about humidity and the temperature, but what we really want to talk about is his epic novel, The Boatman'S Daughter, which has just been published in paperback by our colleagues at Titan Books and is available for order from the links attached to this video. How are you, mate?
I'm pretty good, pretty good. Thanks for having me on here.
Oh, it's great to see you, and thanks for sharing the time. I know you're a busy dude. What can you tell us about The Boatman'S Daughter?
Well, The Boatman's Daughter is a story of Miranda Crabtree, who's a young woman who lives on a river in Arkansas, whose father disappeared 11 years before the sort of narrative starts. And that disappearance has kind of defined her life over the past decade as she's worked for some nefarious people on the river to make ends meet. And in doing so, has also had to protect a couple of people that she loves from those nefarious people, one of them being a witch who brought the other person into the world, which is a young sort of magical boy by the name of Littlefish. So The Boatman's Daughter is kind of a stew of a lot of different ideas that I had that all sprang out of the notion that I wanted to write something set in my home state of Arkansas.
Yeah, and that sort of immortal concept of, you know, dark forces at work, is that something that speaks to you? Does it in any way, on any level, you know, reflect your own childhood and upbringing, or things that used to scare you when you were a kid? I mean, where does it all come from?
Well, I had a good upbringing. I had a good childhood. I had no dark forces at work in my own childhood besides the ones that are in your own head. And your own insecurities as a kid or whatever. But I think for me, this idea of home connected to the novel was more about the place itself than it was, you know, my own particular childhood, although there are things from my childhood that feed into the novel, things that I loved, movies, comic books, things like that. But, you know, I think when I was a kid, I read horror pretty early. I came to horror as a genre pretty early. And so some of the people I were reading were the kind of, you know, mega authors like Dean Koontz and Stephen King, people like that. So that's probably a pretty familiar story that most horror writers would tell, is that they came to horror by way of those folks. So I was sort of just steeped in the genre as a kid, and I came to horror writing a little bit late in my writing career. I had gone to the University of Mississippi from 2000, I would say 2001 to 2004, and got a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. But that degree was basically geared around writing realistic short fiction set in the South. And so it was not a particularly helpful degree in some ways when it came to genre writing. And so for about 10 years after I graduated with that degree, I didn't really write anything. And I think it took me a while to kind of find what I wanted to do. And eventually when I landed on what I wanted to do, horror was it. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, okay, that is very interesting. Now, in The Boatman's Daughter, of course, you have a female protagonist. And how did you find the experience of, you know, writing with that sort of youthful female voice?
I had written a female protagonist in the previous book, and of course, that's not to say that if you do it once, you can do it again successfully.
Which, by the way, is in The Valley of the Sun, which is extremely successful for you.
It was. And I think that with Miranda, a lot of the way that I approached her character was through, in part, the template of Miranda in The Tempest, Shakespeare. So that served as a little bit of inspiration there. With that character, I wanted to kind of flip that character. So in The Tempest, I guess arguably Miranda is not a character with a lot of agency. She is quite frequently manipulated by her father and his machinations. And so I wanted to have a Miranda at the center of this book that is kind of drawing from The Tempest to be very strong and be very active. And so that was one aspect of her character, is that she had to have this core of inner strength that she drew from. Another part of it is that she's essentially raised by her father, the boatman. She is raised in a kind of roughshod way. She learns to hunt, she learns to fish, she learns to do many things that I think traditionally, are not female roles in this time period in the American South. And so that was part of her character as well. I didn't, of course, I have good readers. Like I let probably 6 or 7 different women that I trust implicitly as beta readers, including my wife, my agent, some friends, look at this and make sure I had the details right. So I guess I approached it in a way with a lot of care and an eye toward what is it that comes out of the character's inner core that forms who she is, defines her actions.
Yes, yeah. I think it's such a smart move to have a kind of star chamber of like female voices to help you with your authenticity. And you touched upon your previous novel, In the Valley of the Sun, and I almost said you are lucky to, but it's not luck, because you've totally earned it through your own kind of artistry. But you must be very pleased about the incredible positivity you've had shown towards your work, because not only was In the Valley of the Sun, kind of recognized, had multiple levels of recognition. But of course, everybody nominated the Boatman's Daughter for most anticipated novel. There's that great Paul Tremblay quote, which I believe is on the cover actually. It's essentially saying it's a lush nightmare that put an arrow through my head and heart. When you read that stuff, how do you feel?
Wonderful. Yeah. And with
I
it
would have
comes
been disappointed if you said answered any other way.
Well, with it comes a certain amount of terror as well,
Yeah.
because when people tell you you're good or you're doing something right, there is the added pressure that you've got to continue doing it well, and you've got to continue doing it right. So I think books seem to get harder and harder from that perspective. But no, it was a delight. With the first book, I think it came out in paperback, and Bookstagram kind of brought it back into a new audience, gave it a new audience. And so with that audience came, I think, the expectation for the next book in a way. Yeah.
And if you follow the link to order the book, you'll see it's got a beautiful cover. Actually, it's time to put it together in a beautiful package. So I'm sure you're very pleased with. And if you've crafted the words in something to the degree that you have, to see it beautifully presented must be such a buzz.
It's wonderful. There's a whole long convoluted story I can tell you about coming to this publisher for my second book, but I'll just sort of give you the broad strokes.
Yeah.
MCD is, of course, an imprint of FSG, Farrar, Straus and Giroux. That publisher, is a very storied publisher in the history of New York publishers, and they published Flannery O'Connor and people like that. I mean, these are just this would have been a dream publisher for anybody to land at who's interested in writing literary horror. But in my particular case, the very first rejection letter I ever got as a writer when I was 17 years old and finishing up an undergraduate degree in English was from FSG, from a children's editor there. I had written a book that was, I've since looked back on it, it's terrible. No, of course they rejected me. It was awful. But it was part of an honors thesis that I wrote, I think, at my undergraduate institution. And I had written a novel, and I submitted it to an editor who came through on a circuit of some kind of conference that my school was putting forward. And she was with FSG at the time, and so I still have this letter that I got as my first rejection letter from like one of New York's biggest premier publishers at the time, which is kind of funny. But I went through the revision process of this book. I wrote it between 2017 and 2018, right in conjunction with the publication of my first novel. And the manuscript went through some changes, and we submitted it on its first round of publication attempts, and it was rejected by a number of places that offered good feedback. It said this needs to be different, or this doesn't work. So we pulled it from submission, and I did some work on it and changed it again, and we resubmitted it. And the only publisher that wanted it was MCD. And so I got that call, and I was just, I was floored. And so the process of getting to the cover of the book, one of the things about, the cover that I was really keen on, they came up with two designs, but this is a cover that's so rich in so many different ways, in the way it evokes the book. Some people have looked at the type and seen a fish hook. Some people, I look at it and I see a tombstone. And of course, this character here, that you can't really see it, but there's just some detail work around his shoes that just blows me away. Because I had mentioned that one of the inspirations for this was some of the early Graham Ingalls art and work in EC Comics.
Yeah,
and so,
right on. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I saw this, I was just thrilled beyond measure. So yeah. And plus it's got this just amazing kind of snakeskin effect on it as well. And the Titan edition that you guys have, that's an amazing cover as well, with the boat paddles and the cross.
Yes, right on. Yeah.
I'm just blown away by all the cover work that's been done on this.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can see that, and I think it's a beautiful sequence of packages to present your work. It's a great novel, mate. It's a great achievement, and I know that the Titan guys are very proud to be publishing it in the UK. Thank you very much for, and as I say, you can order the book right here. Thanks very much for spending some time with us today, mate. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. This was a delight.
And I'm looking forward very much to your next book, mate.
So am I.
Yeah. Take care, Andy. All the best.
Thank you, Andrew.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.